U.S. President Donald Trump has launched his most direct attack on Iran's supreme leader, Ali Khamenei. In an interview to U.S. media, Trump called for an end to Ayatollah's 37-year-long reign. Talking to Politico, Trump said, and I'm quoting, "It's time to look for new leadership in Iran." The remarks are the closest to the U.S. president has come yet to calling for a regime change in Iran. Trump went further, calling Khamenei a sick man who should run his country properly and stop killing people. Now, Trump claimed that Iran is the worst place to live anywhere in the world because of poor leadership. Trump has repeatedly threatened to intervene as Iran cracked down on massive protests against the government. But he seems to have changed course, or at least hit a pause for now. When asked about a possible military action, Trump said that the best decision Khamenei ever made was not hanging more than 800 people. Now, Trump's comments seem to reaffirm that Iran stopping the scheduled hangings played a key role in Trump deciding against an immediate strike. On Friday, Trump had commended the Iranian government for not following through on executions.
Well, we're going to see. As you know, Iran canceled the hanging of over 800 people. They were going to hang over 800 people yesterday, and I greatly respect the fact that they canceled that.
A Washington Post report says that Trump nearly ordered a strike before Tehran made the last-minute concession. The report, citing a person familiar with the matter, said that allies had been alerted that a U.S. strike was likely. Ships and planes were on the move. Personnel at Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar were advised to evacuate to avoid an expected Iranian counterstrike. But a text from Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi to Special Envoy Steve Witkoff reportedly diffused the situation. While it assured that there will be no hangings, it must be noted that Iran had publicly denied that it had any plans to execute any protester. The report also details how U.S. allies in West Asia urged Trump against the strikes. Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu personally called Trump to press for restraint. He had warned that Israel was not fully prepared to absorb Iranian retaliation without strong U.S. military backing, which was not in place. Now, the absence of a nearby U.S. aircraft carrier heightened vulnerability. Well, since then, USS Abraham Lincoln has been moving towards the region. Now, reports added that Saudi Arabia joined Arab allies to urge Trump to avoid military strikes on Iran, warning that retaliation can destabilize the region and damage the global economy. But Trump, however, denies anyone convinced him to pause the strike.
Did Arab and Israeli officials convince you to not strike Iran?
Nobody convinced me. I convinced myself. You had yesterday scheduled over 800 hangings. They didn't hang anyone. They canceled the hangings. That had a big impact.
Meanwhile, U.S. Senator Lindsey Graham has said that if these reports of Arab nations' intervention are true, then Arab countries are not a very good ally of U.S. Graham, a close ally of Trump, is on a tour of Israel. He has also claimed that decisions taken today will set the closure of the future of West Asia for 1,000 years. Well, now to discuss more on the topic, we're now joined on the broadcast by Scott Lucas, professor of the international politics at Clinton Institute University College in Dublin. Thank you so much for joining us on the broadcast. Now, when it comes to, of course, Trump has now denied and backed out, saying, well, he will not, there's no plans, considering the fact that Iran listened to Trump and did not execute 800 people, although 3,000 people already killed. But when it comes to military actions, there were many reports. Arab allies, as I just mentioned, convinced Trump, or Israel did, because they are not ready. Trump said that he did it on his own volition. Although U.S. has now deployed, according to reports, USS Abraham Lincoln carrier. What could be next on Trump's mind now?
Well, I mean, Trump's mind is unpredictable, to say the least. So having threatened these strikes on Iran, the Iranians, either directly or through others, got a message across to Trump that said, oh, no, we're not going to kill anybody else. We're not going to execute anybody else. And despite the fact that conservatively, at least 3,000 protesters have been killed by Iranian security forces, and many more were threatened with the death penalty, Trump said, oh, okay, that's good enough for me. You're not going to kill anybody else. And he made up this story that Iran had 800 people that they were about to hang and they suspended that, which is completely untrue. So, in terms of Trump's mind, it's like he marched his troops up the hill and then he's marched them back down again. But I think you have to ask what the administration is going to do next. Are there others in the administration that still want to put further pressure on Iran, including the prospect of military action? I don't think that's the case. I think because of two factors. I think the first is that the people within probably the Pentagon, people in other agencies realized it's one thing to threaten military strikes on Iran, it's another to carry them out, that it could cause a great deal of instability and not work. And secondly, I think the most important thing is that the Gulf states and Israel and Turkey all told the Americans, don't do this, that you're not going to do anyone any good, including Iran's protesters, by carrying out military strikes.
Right. And when you talk about the unpredictability, we have, of course, seen his first statements coming about, regime change. Do you think he will go for regime change? And if yes, what is the alternative that U.S. have to replace the regime in Iran as of now?
No, I don't think he'll go for regime change because, frankly, it's too difficult. The fact here is that despite all the myths about the U.S. and Israel being behind these protests, so on, they weren't. These were Iranians around on the ground who wanted political, economic, social reforms, and possibly a change of the regime. This wasn't the U.S. directing them. So the U.S. really doesn't have doesn't really have leverage right now that the protests have been suppressed. And secondly, I think Trump is distracted. Trump is now going to look at something shiny elsewhere. So last night, the news wasn't Iran. It was his latest threats to try to seize Greenland from Denmark and from America's European allies.
Right. And you also earlier mentioned, what the Trump administration wants in Pentagon. We have had this one comment come from U.S. Senator Lindsey Graham, who just did slam the Arab nation, saying that they're not very good allies of U.S. If they had stopped the calls or the move for attacks. How do you analyze that then?
Well, I think there's a split amongst Republicans. You've got Republicans like Lindsey Graham who very much want to see that regime change in Iran. They've wanted that for years. They're now frustrated that that's not imminent. You've got other Republicans who are very much against the U.S. using military action, and they let that be known to Trump. So you've got, far from this idea of a unified group behind Trump, whichever way he decides to go, I think you've got a Republican Party that's in a bit of disarray over this.
Right. And now also I would like for you to help us understand the situation in Iran right now. Do you really think that the descent has now indeed been stopped there? According to reports, of course, visuals we do see that there are no demonstrations going on. Over 3,000 people have been killed. Do you observe the descent to have been indeed stopped by the government?
No, I'm fortunate to have many friends inside Iran. I worked there before the crackdown in 2009 by the regime, and I'm still in touch with people. And I would say that for now, they have brutally suffered. For now, they're having to mourn the fact that, in the words of one of my friends, everyone here knows someone who has been killed. They are going to have to regroup economically. They're going to have to put up with what is a very horrible situation just to get by day to day. But I would say, despite the fact that the regime again has suppressed the protest, as they have in 2009, 2017, 2019, 2022, that my Iranian friends talk about fire underneath the ashes, that even if you crack down on these protests and if you quell them for now, that the causes of the protest remain. And yes, people will come back and call for their rights, call for justice, and call for decency in the future.
All right. Of course, we'll be looking forward to any update we get that from that region. But thank you so much for joining us on the broadcast and giving your analysis.
Thank you.